Hey, thank you all so much for coming on a Saturday morning. It's really great to be here. And, I wanted to say hello and wanted to say that I really support what everybody's doing here, from entrepreneurship to robotics to education to building the future in our children and creating a better world for us all. And these are things that I really love. I wanted just to give you sort of a taste of what I've been doing, and hopefully some of these ideas could influence you in some way, shape, or form, and maybe even add to what you're doing, I hope. So I'd like to walk you through just a few of the projects that I've had and a few of the things that I've done, and a few of the sort of ways that I think about myself. I'm a creative director, visual strategist, an experience designer, anthropologist, educator. We're all so many different things. I'm a human being, of course, which makes me, by my very nature, an artist, and all of you as well. And I think that's really kind of a good thing for me to remember. And I tell myself that all the time, because if you consider yourself an artist at your core, you are by nature creative, and this is where all of these things come from. And my focus, though, for the past 20 years has really been imagination and desire. And imagination is this really, really powerful thing, of course. It gets us up in the morning, it allows us to plan, allows us to make companies, it allows us to do pretty much, everything we do. But it also has this really special capability of calling us into what we think can become. Who are we going to be? What do you think we could be? And how do you plan on making that happening? And these are very, very big questions that drive us all. I want to show you a few things from the perspective of dealing with science and technology. And I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of work through my life's path. A number of years ago, I used to work with kids across the United States, asking them to build communities and design products to live on Mars in the future. And it was kind of an interesting thing, because when you think about doing that, rather than doing that here on Earth, you really have to consider the difference in the environmental conditions. You have to consider the difference in sort of the problems that you have to deal with. And it sort of presents sort of a refreshed look at design thinking, design, entrepreneurship. You need to look at all of the conditions that are around you, because they're all slightly different on Mars, right? And what we would do is the students would come up with their ideas, and then they would express these ideas through the arts. And so we didn't always dictate. We started out, well, it's kind of funny, I'll tell you this. We started out dictating, thinking about, we'd say, you should do this kind of project. Maybe it should be an architecture project. But along the way, we realized that if you allow the students to choose what they would like to do, the way that they would like to express it, it became very personal to them, and it engaged them in a way that was completely different. And there was a project that we worked with in Chicago. A group of students were there, and we were thinking about what would it be like to live on Mars. They learned about the conditions. They learned about building, architecture in 1/3 gravity. And we thought it was going to become an architecture class. Architects were helping out. They volunteered. But these students called me up towards the end of their project, and they said, hey, we have a different idea that we would like to do. We'd like to sing a song about it. And so naturally I said, let's give it a shot. And so I'd like to show you what they did. We helped them out with a video, but you'll see that there's words on the bottom of the screen, and that is just to help you understand sort of the thought process that they went through. But it was a lot of fun.
We're recording. We're rolling.
We done made a habitat, how they figure that?
Okay, people, it's about that time. South City's get back, relax, it's about to go to Mars. Earth bye-bye, this is our new home. Before we can leave, we have to look at it.
Come on, man. Come on, don't slap me around.
Seatbelt, keep on objects you see it all the time. And it seems like we about to blast off in 5, 4, 3, 2.
You got it, man. You can do it, brother.
Blast off. Okay, come off the ship, people. We done finally made it here. Yeah, I know it's cold, but just come out of the habitat, you're gonna be warm. So check this out.
Okay, people, whole time we done had it fronted, took things for granted, but now we gonna show them run it. It's a cold planet, so we doing damage. Put on your boots and spacesuits, we about to go manage. We done made a habitat, how they figure that? So we bout to go and show them how to live on that red planet. Man, it's oh so cold. You think it's hot, but we like, nope, it's froze. So froze, okay, now get out the ship. We up in this habitat, earth nowhere near. Plant them trees so we can cultivate them right. I can take up on your backs, exhale and take flight. You're gonna be warm, we need the surfaces at night. King James about to show you the how-tos of new life. Drip for water, the solar circuit on. Earth bye-bye, cause Mars our new home.
Bye-bye Earth, we off to Mars. Survival 101, King James going hard. 7-month trip, yeah I know we going far, but we got them bars, no worries now. Cause shots sound words, he about to show you.
Alright people, we done been here for about 3 months now. Y'all know how to rotation. So set up the UV lights on the wall.
All right, I'm just gonna stop it there just for the purpose of time. But I learned so many things through this project and this process of Imagine Mars. And one of the things is that imagination is our superpower. This is something that like really activates us, and it activated the kids. And it really made me ask the question of like, what does it mean when you take charge of your own learning rather than somebody else trying to do that for you? When you have the power to build something yourself, it gives you something else at the end. It makes you feel really good. It makes you feel really empowered. And that is something that I took with me along the way. And I didn't ever want to take that away from people. How do you give that to people? And it made me realize something too, is that it was kind of funny. I was listening to the radio the other day and there was a social psychologist talking, and she said something that really kind of captured my attention. She said, you know, if you think about all of us as human beings, that we exist on this spectrum of despair to hope, you know, human beings, we're like 51% on the side of hope. Like barely, right? Because if we weren't, everything would fall apart, you know? But we get out of bed in the morning, it's what keeps us going. And what's kind of interesting is imagination, thinking about what we could do, how that could happen, what will exist in the future, how we could make that real, that notches us just a little bit more onto that side of hope, right? And that's a really important thing. We want to keep it on that side. And we want to make that as real as possible. And so in 2014, there was a comet, not this one, but a comet the European Space Agency was planning on landing on. This is Halley's Comet. They were planning on landing on something called 67P, Churyumov-Gerasimenko, a comet that had never been seen before up close. The closest image, the closest view that we had at the time leading up to it was sort of a light model of it that was to give this very fuzzy shape. And comets are spectacular, beautiful things, as you can see. They are these giant mountains of ice that fly around our solar system. They're thought to be the remnants of this early time, this sort of primordial collection of atoms from the very beginning of our solar system. So very scientifically interesting, because the scientists thought if they could figure out what that's made out of, it's sort of like going back in time, 4.7 billion years. And that's a great thing. So European Space Agency was about to land on it for the first time with the Rosetta mission. NASA had 3 instruments on that mission, and so that gave us an opportunity to do something. The folks at NASA came to our studio and asked us to do something that would get people to think about comets. We were planning something for the World Science Festival, and it was really interesting too, because I went through, in all my projects, I go through this really large learning curve, right? I didn't know anything about comets. I'm asking the questions that everybody else would. What's the difference between a comet, a meteor, an asteroid? And was thinking about entering this conversation with the public by giving them information. Oh, you should know, you should learn about comets. There's so many interesting things that I was just really excited about. But what became clear to me is that the most beautiful thing that I could imagine about comets were its tail. It's the tail of a comet, right? It's these massive mountains of ice are, coming towards the sun, and then they heat up, and that water, melts, right? But turns directly into gas and then leaves this trail of gas behind it. And what would happen if we could just allow people to interact with that? What if we could take a comet and bring it down to human scale and just allow people to play inside the tail of a comet? What would that do? And so we tried it out as an experiment, and we did this. This is our version of a comet. The notion at that time was that comets may have brought water to Earth. So we were conceptually connected to the notion that, water, ice, and comets. We wanted to point people in that direction and get them to think about these things. We wanted them to feel curious. We wanted to present them with a sense of wonder, almost like you were discovering it for the very first time. That sort of scientific moment of discovery when you had that aha experience, but also not give them too much information, so that with the hope that we could create something memorable. And this is kind of something that we do with most of our projects is we film them and we look for things that happen. And we saw this little girl do this. We started to realize that, wow, something special is going on, She may not have the answers, but she's getting something else. And that's a moment that she can remember and questions that she'll take with her. And those questions are associated with what is this thing, At this festival, what we did is we sort of flanked the area with a number of different scientists that could answer those questions to try to not leave them unanswered. But we also exist in a world where information is available in many, many different ways. But what I've seen with a lot of people is what becomes less available or less, real in people's, psyche is the curiosity of the interest to know more about these things. And through this project, I learned something that became really, really important to our practice, is that we can give questions. We don't need to give answers, because sometimes giving questions is what it takes to allow people to grow, right? It's that entry into the conversation. Afterward, NASA came to us and they said, well, we want people to think about the Earth Science Program, because, when people think about NASA, a lot of times it's about the International Space Station or it's about landing on Mars, but what a lot of people don't realize is that NASA has a whole fleet of Earth science satellites, and they're doing a lot to help us all figure out how the Earth system works. It's very complicated. We have a long way to go. But it's also a very complex issue because it also deals with things that sometimes we'd rather not think about, right? And so we have this challenge of how do you get people to pay attention to the fact that there's things that are up there. And one of the reasons that people don't think about it is when you look at something like this, you look up in the sky. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind, right? This is a normal view of the sky that you would see, but what you don't see are these fleet of satellites that are moving around, letting us understand more about the Earth that we live on. And so what we did is we kind of took all of the 19 Earth science satellites and we decided to give them a voice. And we thought maybe if we treat them like they're a bird or maybe even like a plane, then we could listen to them. And if we could listen to them, maybe what we need is like a giant dome. And then we fill this dome with speakers in all directions, like a sound system on steroids. And what if we could then take that sound that we've given each of the satellites, and as that satellite moves across the sky, we can move that sound on the inside of the dome. So creating a relationship between the movement of the sound and the movement of the satellites. And we worked really hard to make sure that that was true, so that when you point up at a sound, you could continue that line up into the sky, and that's exactly where that satellite would be. And this is what it looks like, and this is what it sounds like. So what's kind of interesting about this is that what we decided not to do, and I'll just let you know, so what I'm taking you through is this process of learning that we've went through, that I went through, is that first we learned we can give questions. And then we learned, well, how much information can we pull back from? Like, what's the minimum amount of information that we can give that will drive curiosity around a central question? And the question that we wanted to really kind of bring up with people is, are those real? Are they really satellites up in the sky? Is that really where they are, right? And so rather than say exactly what each satellite does, the solution that we came up with was really just to give a very small indication of what that satellite was called. So you're hearing two things in that past little sound clip. One, there's 2 chapters in this, is that you hear each satellite where they are in the sky above you, and they say hello twice. And then you hear 24 hours compressed into 1 minute. So you really start to get within that 1 minute a sense of rotation. And then it goes back to where they are in the sky. And what's kind of funny is you saw these people like looking up, and after you sort of take it in, you just get a sense of their presence, their existence. And we kind of think about this as like an indicator, right? This is something that indicates the presence of these invisible things in the sky above you. And so people would walk in and sit and listen. And in the image before, this is when it was in New York. Right now it's in California at the Huntington Gardens. And it's kind of great. It was only supposed to be there for 4 months, and now it's going on its 4th year based on public demand. And as you can see, a lot of what we're trying to do is kind of really take the concepts that sort of drive science and technology, specifically within NASA in this case, and kind of give it its humanity, right? Allow people to experience it in a way that is inspiring to them, in a way that they can understand it. But what we learned from this project was that there is this really important economic exchange that's happening all around us all the time. And it's this ability to give and receive, this permission to wonder. And believe me, I think you will understand and you'll feel it when people take that away from you. But you may not understand when you're taking it away from other people. And so that exchange that's happening, this creation through design for people to have permission to wonder, is something that became very valuable to us too, which led us to this next project. This is a hallway within the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. At the end of that hallway is the Exoplanet Exploration Office. And that's the place that is in charge of facilitating and designing missions that look for planets around other stars. And it turns out there's quite a bit of them. It's been 22 years since the first one was discovered, 23 years, something like that. I don't know the actual count now, but I think it's somewhere up in the 4,000, maybe 5,000 already. And literally, we're just limited by technology at this point. But you may see things like this, which is kind of funny, is that this is an artist's rendition of an exoplanet. And when you see something like this is a super Earth, right? Earth-like planet. It's really captivating and it's beautiful. But it also does something too, is that it makes you think that we might know more than we actually do. Because when you look at that picture, it's almost like it's like a photograph, But in reality, that we don't know that much yet about, we don't have clear images like that of exoplanets. And just to really kind of test each other within our studio, we created this game that we would create things or find images of exoplanets, and we'd ask each other if people could tell if something was an exoplanet or not. Do you guys want to play this game? All right. Well, you have no choice. So, is it an exoplanet? Anybody? Yes? No, it's a hamburger bun. What about this one? Is it an exoplanet? Of course it's not. It's an avocado. And so, it just was a way to remind ourselves that, you may see an image like this, and you may say, oh, what a beautiful exoplanet. But in reality, when we get like a really close-up image of it, it very well may look like this. So you never know. But what that reminded us of when we were back in this hallway and thinking about like how to portray the vast characteristics of these really interesting planets. I mean, I'm talking about things that rain molten glass, planets that are described as diamond planets or styrofoam planets, giant lava planets, characteristics that are beyond our sense of, what could be possible here on Earth. We thought maybe the route of illustration would be the best way to go. And when we looked at something like this, these really kind of became these like fundamental questions that sort of we were dreaming up of. It's like, imagine if you could go to a planet with 2 stars. Would you have 2 shadows? Or a planet around like a red dwarf sun, does it reflect red light in all directions? Could the plants actually evolve to photosynthesize if there were there? In a way that would reflect red light? Or a super Earth, something that has like a tremendous gravity, what would you do for fun? Maybe it'd be like skydiving or just jumping off cliffs. And we started to realize, well, maybe we could create like a travel bureau, right? Thinking about like, what would it be like to go to these places and what would you do there for fun? And this really kind of initiated something that really kind of took us by enormous surprise, because keep in mind, this was done for a hallway inside JPL. And I forgot to mention that it was done in honor of a very important scientist. Her name is Sarah Seeger, who was coming to the lab, and we wanted to just kind of show that we were thinking about these important discoveries. And this notion of just playing with the imagination and thinking about what could be someday based on the work that is being done now became sort of a really fun way to do it with like a wink and a smile. But what we didn't expect is that when they went public, this kind of thing would happen. The whole, there was a huge response to the release of these things. All over the place, people were thinking about, it made us realize that we're one step closer to science fiction, right? These things are there. And I was really lucky to work with a number of really talented illustrators. And so the artwork is very good, but it's not only about the artwork, right? It's about something that is much more important than that. It's the fact that these places are real. And someday, maybe, we can go there. And another thing that's really interesting is when you do work for NASA or the government, at least in the United States, when you do that, it's paid for by the general public. So when you release these things, it belongs to the public. It's a public domain. And so we started to see things like this coming up, right? And we would go on websites and we'd be like, oh my God, I can't even believe it. We can buy anything with these. You can buy like a tie, a cup. We can even buy, wrapping paper or guitar pick. And you can even get a flask. And it was kind of funny because the only thing that really kind of bothered us about this is that, man, shouldn't it be more expensive? We're like, just raise that price a little bit and make us feel a little bit better. But it was kind of fun and it was really funny. Shortly thereafter their release, somebody sent this email to my colleague and it just really cracked us up. It kind of gives a sense of what the way that people feel about it. And this one is particularly funny. I'd like to acquire the posters so I can hang them in our child's nursery. And my wife isn't pregnant now, but we planning to start to try in the next few months. I would like my son and daughter to grow up dreaming big. And so that really made me feel really good. That people connected with these things. But the connection was based on their imagination. What could we become? How does what we're doing now affect our imagination of what we will be or what we can be? And it's something that drives us in that direction. It calls us in that direction. It's a guide. We may never get there, and it probably will never look like this. But at least it's a sign. It's sort of a wayfinder that allows us to go in that direction. And outside of JPL, I do a number of different projects as well. I'm not going to talk about all of them just because of the time. But there is something really special that I did want to bring up. I found this quote, and I think it's a really special thing to me, is that the universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper. There are many, many things out there that we haven't discovered yet. There are many, many things around us that we are incapable at this point to sense and to perceive. And that doesn't mean it's mystical. It doesn't mean that but they're there. And a situation happened to me a little while ago. My friend called me up and he said, hey, David, we should really start this thing called the Museum of Awe. And I said, what is the Museum of what? He said, the Museum of Awe. Because somebody called him and told him that and gave him that idea. And then he called me as this domino effect. And I said, interesting, what is the Museum of Awe? And he said, I don't know. He said, let's make it. And I love that notion of awe, right? Because it makes us feel like we're a part of something bigger. It makes us feel small. It makes us feel connected. And it makes us want to know more. And it makes us realize that there's beautiful things all around us. And this is what we're trying to do. We want to allow people to see the beauty that's around them, but in a new way. We're all so distracted. We've got phones, we've got businesses, we've got families, we've got so many responsibilities. And what we don't have a lot of times is the time to calm down and start to recognize the hidden, beautiful, and wonderful things that surround us. And so over a conversation one day, we realized that we don't want to create a museum. The museum is already created. We're in it, right? So we are inside the Museum of Awe. And what we're doing now is creating a series of exhibits that will travel around the world. And each of those exhibits is meant to elicit that emotion of awe and to get you to think about the world in a new way, to get you to think about your environment that's around you. Just as a little example of sort of these invisible things that are waiting for their discovery. This is one discovery. This is a cloud chamber. You guys can look up online how to make these things. I'm not going to tell you now. It's very easy. But this is a cloud of vapor of alcohol, not vodka, but rubbing alcohol. And what happens when you create this vapor cloud, you start to see something, and this will happen anytime you do it, anywhere around the world, because these particles are flying through us right now. They're invisible in any other way. But these are muons that are created. You start to see them flying through there, almost like little contrails. They're the remnants of an exploded star. Billions of years ago, a star exploded. That energy traveled throughout the galaxy, interacted with the atmosphere on our planet, shattered atoms, and rained down these particles on us. They are going through us right now. But it's kind of an interesting reminder to me is that these particles from an exploded star, the result of an exploded star, are not that unlike us. We are the remnants of an exploded star, kind of resituated and reformed in a way that allows us to be here right now and talk about robotics and the future. But they exist, and there's really not another way that you can see them. And there are many other things around us right now that in 100 years, 200 years, we'll look back and kind of be surprised that we didn't know about. And this makes me really excited because my sort of big learning point up to now is that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. And we need to realize that together we are part of something much bigger than ourselves, because together we can help each other become greater and become more. And the real intention of the Museum of Awe is to help you all realize, and to help us realize, is that it truly is a gift and a privilege to be alive. We are this, conglomeration of atoms, the results of an exploded star. Who knows what's going to happen next? But we have this time now, and I'm using it in the best way that I can, and I hope that you do the same. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Do we have any questions for David? I had a quick one for you.
Sure.
Back in the day, JFK told us that we're going to the moon because it's hard, and it was super inspirational. It's one of the more classic things that come up about, okay, how are we inspiring a population to get behind that goal?
Yeah.
These days, when we think of the next big thing in space, I mean, if we go to Mars, it's getting closer, but it's still some way away.
Yeah.
How is it significantly harder for you to keep that inspiration going around space and this, to keep people's attention, especially as our attentions are getting shorter? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is harder. And it's like, well, we are curious creatures, but I think once we find out about something, once it becomes normal, then it becomes a part of our lives, right? And what we're constantly trying to do is try to find a new approach, something that will activate the imagination to allow you to think farther beyond. Right now, exoplanets is a really interesting way to do that. And but there's millions of different ways to do that. I think simply going to Mars, that will be interesting. People are actually really trying to do that now. But I think a lot of those ideas exist around us, and it doesn't need to be about space. It's just about sort of approaching ideas from a new perspective. And I think that can be done in a million ways, and that's constantly what we're looking for.
Cool. Some questions for David before we move on? All right, we've got a few there. We'll go to the gentleman down the front, and then we'll go to there. Number one, number two.
Hey, how do you foster that culture of creativity? Because
I know your work for ages, as you know, but keeping that kind of like high quality impact on a constant level, how is that happening in the JPL?
Oh, okay, yeah, so that's really great. I think the culture of creativity is driven, I think, by sort of the audacity of the ideas, for one, of trying to do something that nobody has ever done before. And I think just that notion of trying to push the edge of possibility, which a lot of people are doing in many different industries, it exists in sports as well, but when you're working on that frontier edge, it's important to know where that edge exists, right? Because sometimes you'll find out by going too far. But you need to continuously push it. And I think that it's the fundamental necessity is creativity. And that's why, I think in places like this are really important, like giving people the tools to understand that they are fundamentally creative creatures, so that they can go to that edge and keep on pushing forward. And I think that's what we all sort of owe to each other, is to keep on pushing and to not sort of, kind of fall back and fall into an area of comfort, where it's probably a lot easier to exist in a place where you're not at that edge. But when you are at that edge, it's impossible not to be creative, right? That's we need to be around that.
We have the gentleman down here. Thank you, sir.
Hi, I actually have 5 of your posters on my wall.
Hey, no way,
thanks.
great.
Yeah, really funny.
And the hip flask too, but that's something else.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My question is your exhibition for the Museum of Art coming to Estonia?
Yeah, we very much would like it to. Yeah. So right now we are in a series of, we have a testing lab in Los Angeles where we're testing a variety of different experiences. And once we get that on the road, Estonia will absolutely be on that list, because it's my first time here and I love it.
Beautiful. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, David. It's
Thank
been
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you.